The Mount Rushmore of live television writing is Paddy Chayefsky, Rod Serling, and Reginald Rose. Each brought a unique sensibility to the medium, and each should be celebrated and analyzed for creating something very different.
Look, I tell you, Duran, you ought to call the police. You can't run things like this.
Who can?
You can. I mean, this kind of stuff is dangerous, taking over the law.
Of all the great writers for live television, Reginald Rose is probably known the least. He was probably the one great television writer who stayed with the medium the longest and was able to have a great success over time. He began as a freelance writer. He then developed one of the great television legal series of all time, The Defenders, which ran from 61 to 65, and probably the most respected show of the 60s. And from there, he developed a lot of other television miniseries. He worked with his partner, Herbert Brodkin, one of the great producers in television history, and was able to create miniseries and create television dramas that continue the tradition of live television. Rose, for the most part, stayed in the background. It's interesting, in 1962, there was a TV Guide column that had a discussion between Rose and Rod Serling. And Rose was comfortable with the direction of television. Serling was the angry man, really hating the advertisers, hating the way they changed the script. Rose was much more philosophical. He really was concerned with the big issues. What is prejudice? What is the justice in America?
We should never have gone to this place. I have said it and said it.
Why?
Because we should stay with our own people.
We are with our own people.
Do they think so?
I don't know what they think. I only know what I know. We are the same as they. How do they say it? 100% American.
Chayefsky and Serling got so much more attention in the press than Reginald Rose did. There were articles about Rose, but never really looking at what distinguished Rose from the other writers. And when you begin to look at Rose's scripts, you can see that he is dealing much more with the tensions and the contradictions of American politics than his two other cohorts are. Rose is really dealing with McCarthyism. Almost every script he writes deals with mob opinion, how the mob can shape opinion and sort of turn everyone against the sole individual.
I don't go for mobs and strong-arm stuff. It goes against me. This is my home. What my family does or don't do is none of their business.
Alec?
Look at me. I'm scared. There's no right to make me scared.
You know, Reginald Rose is one of these individuals that no one suspects him of anything. There are many more frustrations that a Serling has in television. Rose is a solid individual. He has great respect. And although he writes and critiques American society, he is the one writer who's able to continue to do it. Reginald Rose wants to understand the transformations in American society, and he reads a news report on a black family that moves into a suburban Illinois neighborhood. Rose wants to translate that disruption into an original drama. He calls it Thunder on Sycamore Street. In his original version, he sort of translates the entire circumstance of the case. He has a black family moving into a white neighborhood. Unfortunately, the Studio One executives and the advertisers really are thrown into their own turmoil, seeing a black family on American television. This is pre-civil rights. No one is quite sure how the American public will react, especially the South. So that Rose is forced to change the script and make the black family into a white family of an ex-convict. So the whole idea of bringing the multiculturalism that's sort of emerging in the 50s is impossible in television. You really can't look at specific demographic groups like an African American or Hispanic. Everything has to be generalized. But for Rose, that's a frustration, but it's not a major problem. He has a much deeper issue at hand. He wants to look at prejudice in American society, and whether it's a black family or an ex-con family, it doesn't matter to Rose. It's still prejudice. The great thing about Rose's script about Thunder on Sycamore Street is you get a sense of neighborhood. It has sort of a science fiction feel to it because you're looking at an incident that will happen at 7 o'clock, but you go back in time 20 minutes and see how 3 different families are reacting to this potential uprising. And Rose is able to look at how families think about change. And there are many different ways to do it. And I think that's the one thing about Rose. He wants to see how different opinions sort of coalesce into a dominant opinion and also into a more subtle, nuanced opinion. And Rose is always looking for that dynamic of how conformity is made and also how the lone dissenter is also made as well.
Boy, oh boy, there's always one.
So, what do we do now?
I guess we talk.
Boy, oh boy.
You really think he's innocent? I don't know.
Reginald Rose is a freelance writer, and he's developed relationships over time, and one of them is with Sidney Lumet. Lumet helped him get his first script on the air, and he always wants to work with Lumet. He has a great respect for him. Although Lumet is younger, about 3 years younger than Reginald Rose, Rose recognizes how well he works with actors, and there's a different type of ethos when Sidney Lumet directs a Rose script. And beginning in '56, there are two major works that Sidney Lumet directs based on Reginald Rose's script. There's this relatively obscure anthology series called Elgin Hour, and Rose develops a script called Crime in the Streets that Sidney Lumet directs. It's on ABC, and a network that has much less viewers than the two other networks, NBC and CBS. But it allows them to experiment. And in Crime in the Streets, Rose looks at the developing juvenile delinquency and why are disadvantaged youth really beginning to turn on the populace? What is it about their upbringing that makes them a little different than other youth from previous eras? Reginald Rose wants to know that mindset, and certainly that works very well with Sidney Lumet. Lumet knows the streets of New York as well as anyone, and there's a fine young actor, John Cassavetes, that Lumet is able to really bring out Rose's feelings toward this whole change in the American teenager. You know, there are different ways to approach a Rose script. Franklin Schaffner looks at the group, and you certainly see that in 12 Angry Men. There's not one of the jury that really has emotions that take over the entire drama. You don't have that many close-ups in a Franklin Schaffner television drama. When Sidney Lumet takes over a Rose script, it's very different. He's looking at the heart of the emotion. Which character is conveying the emotional subtext of the script? There are many more close-ups in a Lumet production, and he's really looking for the emotional roller coaster ride that individual characters are going through. So you'll see many more intense close-ups trying to get into the mind and soul of individual characters. These close-ups sort of bring an emotion to a Reginald Rose script that you don't see in The Defenders, you don't see in the Studio Ones. So Lumet has a different approach to a Reginald Rose script.
Now, look, is he the boy or ain't he?
I don't know.
Now, what do you mean you don't know? Now, come on.
I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go home. I'm tired.
Look, was he the boy or wasn't he?
No!
Okay. Let's go.
Tragedy in Temporary Town is a sort of a legal process, but not in the courtroom. It deals with the assault of a young girl, and these construction workers have to try to decide who committed this crime. And like in many Rose scripts, mob opinion emerges, and they go to the easy target. They go to the Hispanic, who's not as articulate, who can't defend himself, and they decide that it's this outsider who committed the crime.
Now, you listen to this story, boy. This is the way it happened. You were walking through these woods,
No.
and that girl came along,
No, I wasn't there.
and you jumped on her.
No!
Come on, tell the truth once in your life, one time.
I am.
The one thing about tragedy is that it has this one individual who'll stand up against mob opinion. The character is played by Lloyd Bridges. And it's a real interesting performance because Lloyd Bridges has this one major scene where he is outraged against the mob. And he has a piece of wood in his hand and begins to shout and create almost a harangue against what mob opinion does to individuals. And you can really feel the influence of Sidney Lumet on Lloyd Bridges' performance. In many ways, he becomes a method actor. He's so intense, so involved in the role, that he, in fact, curses on live television.
You fucking you say? Go on, take your swat and get out of here! Stinking pigs! Get out of here! Come on, let's get that guy! You... I can't say much because just looking at you is making me sick of my stomach. You know what you are? You're the dregs, the swill, the gutless wonders of the earth. Just look at yourselves. Don't it make you creep with shame? You mob of dirty, thick-skulled pigs. And all of a sudden, you're the law.
Interesting about Tragedy in Temporary Town, the major issue was not about Rose's critique of society, but in the original script, he wrote that the construction workers were living in aluminum homes, that they were homes made by the material that Alcoa was producing. That outraged Alcoa. They did not want aluminum to be used in such a negative fashion. So they changed the script to have them living in wooden cabins. And those accommodations happened throughout live television. The writers always had to change their scripts to the demands of the advertisers. People like Chayefsky and Serling hated it. Rose accepted it to some degree.
This is new Alcoa wrap, the brand new aluminum foil that's now at your store in the bright aluminum blue foil package. And this is also Alcoa wrap, doing the same things for many well-known companies that it does for you.
You know, it's interesting that Reginald Rose was able to sustain his very realistic view of American society into the 60s. Someone like Rod Serling got so frustrated with live television and the sponsors, he created a science fiction series, The Twilight Zone, that could obliquely comment on the contradictions of American society. Rose created a series called The Defenders, and it allowed Rose to continue to look at America realistically, look at many more problems that were sort of haunting American society in the early 60s, and delve into them in much the same way he did in live television. He could look at civil rights, he could look at old age, he could look at many different ways that American society was grappling with issues that were much bigger than individuals. It allowed Rose to look at the legal process. Unlike Perry Mason, it was not a good versus evil. There were many complexities. The Preston law firm did not always win the cases. In fact, they plea bargained a lot of the cases. They were very difficult. They weren't able really to always triumph. Good was never, in a Rose script, good never triumphed over evil. There was always shades of gray that he was exploring.
They're waiting.
It's funny, I had several conversations with Reginald Rose over the phone. Never had a chance to meet him. We did a whole video history series on Studio One, and Reginald Rose did not want to come to New York to be interviewed. And that's very sad because everyone talked about Rose. There were so many people that were influenced by his work, but Rose was sort of reluctant. He called himself a recluse. He didn't really want to travel. Didn't care that much for the rhythm of Manhattan in the late 20th century, and preferred just to live alone. And that was too bad because Rose is one of the great voices of American television, from the individual dramas of the 50s to the series The Defenders to some miniseries like Studs Lonigan in the 70s. Rose created a whole new way of thinking about television, merging a social conscience with popular entertainment. But I don't think he ever got the credit he really deserved. He was one of the major writers, and he was reluctant to accept, the crown of being such a writer.